Hello, everybody. Apologies because it looks like our live broadcast and our scheduling tool got scheduled for 2, but my intent was to go live at 2:30, which it is now, at least on the East Coast of the United States, New York time. Anyway, we will dive in, and if you had to watch the recording instead of being able to join live, I am very sorry for that scheduling mistake. Anyway, today we're going to be talking about diversity, equity, and inclusion, or DEI, and boards. So we talk about this because we have thought about the lack of representation from marginalized groups on our boards. We've probably thought about homogenous perspectives and decision makings and limited understanding of possibly diverse community needs. And the first thing I want to talk about is why diverse perspectives in decision making is so important. So we have two sides of this diversity, equity, inclusion piece when it comes to the importance to decision making. The first side is if we are going to run just equitable organizations, which many of us should be running because our missions are in some way about bringing justice, bringing equity or equality, depending on your mission, bringing fairness, elevating people's lives in communities in a just way, then we should be making sure that our own practices also represent diversity, equity, inclusion, accessibility. But also the other side, and there's not really two sides, there's just the other piece is we make better decisions when we have better data to inform those decisions. And when we have diverse perspectives, more just equitable, representative staff to be helping make those decisions or inform those decisions, we get better data. We get a clearer picture of what's going on, and it leads us to make better decisions at our organizations. The other reason why it's really important to kind of be thinking about diversity, equity, inclusion, and I like to think about accessibility as well in everything we do, is that I think this is very much a product of human nature. We live in a biased system, right? Our cultures are biases. They're biased. They're often full of inequities. And it's certainly true of our culture here in the United States and the subcultures all around. And I don't think I've come across a culture in current days or historical times that wasn't just loaded with biases and inequities as a system, certainly some more than others, and certainly disadvantaged certain communities or origins more than others. But the reality is our organizations, they are communities, and we inherit the inequities and biases of the communities we are in or are formed from, whether we like it or not. So if we want to be having a more equitable nonprofit, then we need to be kind of closing the floodgates as much as possible, right? So I think there's work we can do to really proactively elevate justice, elevate equity, elevate inclusion. But kind of step one is putting up the guardrails as best as possible to keeping all of the systemic inequities and biases from entering our organizations. Now, with all that said, I want to get down to the secret truth about boards and diversity, equity, and inclusion. See, a number of years ago, I just started getting frustrated with how many boards were struggling to run effectively, to make meaningful contribution to the progress of their organizations. So I went to look up what research had been done about different ways of running boards, and I couldn't find any. So then I went to the prevailing board job description and I looked for research to show that this job description was actually like well thought out or designed or effective. And I couldn't find any. The only research I could find was research about whether or not organizations were using the job description or just kind of flying by the seat of their pants. But that doesn't really help us if we don't know if the job description is effective or not. So I asked the next best question I could think of, which was, where did this job description come from? And this job description, by the way, you can look it up. If you look up, the nonprofit board job description, you'll see some version of probably 10 responsibilities of a nonprofit board. Sometimes there are a few more, sometimes there are a few less. They're basically the same thing. And it has the board in charge of a lot of decisions, big decisions, impactful decisions around strategy, around vision, around direction. And so I was on a search for where this job description came from. And boy, did that take me down a rabbit hole all the way back to the 1600s and the formation of Harvard in 1636. To make a long story short, and you can hear more, I have a whole webinar about boards, which if you'd like to access it, I'll put the link in the comments so that you can see that. But what I want to tell you is that the current job description that we are using has its roots back in a job description for boards made in the 1600s that did have a very specific purpose. The purpose was to give board members who were becoming, when this job description came out, boards were being filled with wealthy Protestant newcomers to the New World who were kind of often, many of them escaping England, the Church of England. They didn't want to be part of the Church of England. And it wasn't just really about religion. This was very much more about money. They were merchants. But at this time and in society in England, in order to have power and influence, we had aristocracy. You had to be born into it. Money did not give you power and influence automatically like it does today. And so here was this group of newly wealthy merchant class. You probably heard of the rise of the merchant class, and they happen to also many have been Protestants, which is why they kind of were here in a way. Although the Protestant piece is not nearly as significant as that they were non-aristocrats who had money and were looking to gain power and influence using their money. So they start giving to these early organizations, creating new generation of leaders like Harvard, like universities, other charitable causes, and they're looking to use their money to gain power and influence. And at first, they would give their money and they could just control how it was being used directly, like basically partially run the organization themselves and get lots of influence that way. But then there were some court battles, and the courts decided that boards had to act as a group. And once an individual gave their money, it belonged to the organization. They could no longer dictate individually how that money was spent. And so the boards, they now had to act as a group. So they created a job description that gave themselves as a board the maximum amount of decision-making power, the maximum ability to turn their financial power into influence power. So literally, we have been using a job description that was designed to put power and influence into the hands of board members. That is like literally the definition, the description of a system designed to add bias and inequity in favor of the board member donors. So rather than thinking about how to make your board, which is ultimately going to be relatively small compared to the amount of impact and staff and total donors and volunteers and people who you are helping, rather than thinking about making your board more diverse, instead, what I want you to be thinking about is taking decision-making power out of your board's hands. Because if your board has relatively little decision-making power, the effect of your board maybe not being diverse goes way, way down. Okay? So that is step one. Now, we're going to shift most of that decision-making power into the hands of your staff, and your staff is going to have to now carry the weight of creating an organization, team, leadership, system, structures, processes that are, I like to call, durable against systemic biases and inequities, and really vibrant in promoting diversity, equity, and inclusion inside the organization, which is a lot easier to do if that's your day-to-day job and you're not a part-time volunteer on a board, right? So this becomes a much more manageable task. Once you've made that really big step, yes, having diversity, equity, inclusion on your board for the remaining few decisions that I believe boards should be making is a great step forward. But it is nothing compared to the giant leap you can make by abandoning that old system that was not designed to make an impact and was literally designed for bias and inequity, right? The point is we wanted to give the power and the influence directly to one group. They were those wealthy Protestant merchant donors on boards. Letting that go is going to make such an incredible difference for your diversity, equity, and inclusion work. And on top of that, it's super, super easy to do that. If you want to learn the exact steps to do instead and how to do this, you can register for my free 5 simple steps to achieving a high-performing nonprofit board masterclass. I'm going to put the link in the chat because it's got some numbers at the end. Let me just pop it in even right now. There we go. There is the link, and I'd love to see you all there. It's an on-demand webinar. It's free. You can access it whenever you want. You can share it with your board members and see how everybody feels about that. Until next time, I'm Sarah Olivieri.